London, 1849. The air was perfumed with lilac and expectation, the chandeliers gleaming like frozen constellations above a sea of silk and lace. The ballroom at Waverley Hall was alive with laughter and gossip, two things that, in polite society, were indistinguishable. Beneath the golden light, young ladies floated like petals across a marble pond, their fans fluttering with the delicate precision of wings. Gentlemen bowed, exchanged measured smiles, and made calculated choices that would decide futures. Everything was appearance, everything except her. She stood alone near the far wall, close enough to feel the pulse of music, but far enough that no gentleman need acknowledge her. The candles reflected faintly in her eyes, lending them the illusion of brightness she did not feel. She had been invited as an act of mercy, though everyone knew mercy in London's season was a cruelty draped in courtesy. A few women spared her glances, pitying but pleased that they were not her. The others whispered behind feathered fans. "Poor creature," murmured Lady Hensley, whose tongue was as sharp as her diamonds. "Pretty enough if one overlooks her." "Circumstance, circumstance," her companion echoed, with mock innocence. "You mean her condition." The words traveled faster than the violins. "Barren," someone whispered, and though the music soared, the word clung to the air like smoke. She pretended not to hear. Her hands, folded neatly against her gown of faded blue satin, remained steady. She had learned long ago that trembling only fed the wolves. Her guardian, the stern Lady Rathbone, had forced her to attend. "You must be seen, child, or you shall disappear entirely." Yet she wondered if disappearance might not have been kinder. Across the glittering room, the doors opened, and a hush followed as naturally as breath. The Duke of Wessex had arrived. He was a man of 34, tall, broad of shoulder, his bearing more soldier than noble. He carried no smile, only composure polished by grief. The death of his wife 2 years prior had turned him into something of a myth, a man too proud to love again, too disciplined to falter. Even now women straightened their posture as he passed, as though proximity to him might grant redemption. Her gaze found him, though she had not meant it to. There was something in the set of his jaw, a shadow of weariness she recognized. She turned away before his eyes could meet hers. The orchestra shifted. The next waltz began. A sea of couples swept forward, gloved hands, powdered faces, orchestrated delight. Her dance card remained as it had all evening, empty. A young man approached, glanced at her name, then hesitated and retreated. It was not malice, it was fear, the fear of being associated with a woman who could not carry lineage. Then came the voice. Low, steady, unmistakably masculine. "May I have this dance?" She looked up. The Duke of Wessex stood before her, extending his hand. His presence was unnerving, as though the air itself had bent to make room for him. I fear there must be some mistake, Your Grace," she stammered softly. "None that I can discern." Her breath caught. Around them whispers bloomed like thorns. "The Duke? Her?" He cannot be serious, but his gaze remained on her, unwavering. And though her instincts screamed that this must be mockery or pity, she placed her gloved hand in his. The music swelled, the ballroom fell away. She had not danced in years, not since the diagnosis that had turned her from promise to pariah. Yet he guided her as though she had never forgotten, his hand firm but not possessive, his movements restrained. "Elegant?" "You seem uneasy," he murmured. "I am unaccustomed to being noticed." "That is London's fault." "Not yours." His voice carried warmth, unexpected, uncalculated. He looked not at her gown nor her reputation, but directly at her face, as though he sought something beyond the visible. She tried to guard herself behind composure, yet her pulse betrayed her. "You honor me, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I do not offer honor," he replied. "Only truth." They moved through the waltz in silence. Every turn seemed to draw them further from the glittering cruelty of the room into some quieter space where masks could fall away. But when the final note faded and the applause rippled like polite thunder, he released her hand and bowed with impeccable formality. "Thank you," he said. As if she had given him a kindness rather than received one, she curtsied, words caught behind her lips. When she rose again, he was already gone. The Duke had left the ballroom without another glance. The chatter resumed, louder now, fed by envy and disbelief. "He pities her," one woman declared. "Perhaps he seeks penance." Her guardian seized her wrist. "You have humiliated yourself enough for one evening. Come." But she could not move. Her heart still beat to the rhythm of the waltz. Her hand still tingled from his touch. It was absurd, she told herself. A single dance did not erase years of ridicule. It did not alter the truth of her body or the law of inheritance. And yet, for one fleeting moment, she had been seen, not as the Barren girl whispered about, but as a woman. The night ended with rain. The carriages outside splashed through puddles as laughter echoed down the marble steps. She waited for her guardian to collect her cloak, standing beneath the painted ceiling of saints and cherubs, listening to the rain tap against the windows. A servant approached, discreetly holding a folded handkerchief. "From His Grace," he whispered. Inside, embroidered with gold thread, were the words, "No one should be forgotten at a dance." Her throat tightened. She said nothing, but when she returned home that night, she placed the handkerchief inside her jewelry box, beneath the ribbon of her first ball. She did not sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the Duke's face, not the grandeur of his title, but the quietness in his eyes, as though he carried a grief that matched her own. Morning brought no answers, only sunlight on the frost-tipped glass, and the echo of a waltz that refused to fade. In the days that followed, society swelled with rumor. The Duke of Wessex danced with her, they said. Twice widowed women blushed in envy. Debutantes fainted in disbelief. Some called it charity, others folly. A few whispered that, perhaps, just perhaps, the Duke saw something none of them could. She attended no further balls that season. The ridicule was too sharp, the stares too pointed. But in the privacy of her small chamber overlooking the Thames, she sometimes traced the embroidered words with trembling fingers. No one should be forgotten. Perhaps he had meant nothing by it. Perhaps it was only civility from a man burdened by ghosts. Yet beneath the relentless clockwork of London society, a seed had been planted, a quiet defiance neither of them yet understood, and so the gossip continued. The rain returned, and the violins played for other lovers. But in one corner of the city, a young woman who had once been forgotten held a golden thread of memory, and dared, for the first time, to hope that pity was not the only language left to her. The narrator's voice, soft and knowing, fades into the sound of distant thunder. That night he gave her a dance. What he did not know, what neither could yet know, was that he had also given her a beginning. The London fog hung low that morning, a pale shroud rolling over cobblestone streets and gaslit corners. It was the sort of mist that made the city seem uncertain of itself, half dream, half memory. From the window of her small chamber overlooking the gray Thames, she watched the river move like breath through the cold air. Days had passed since the night of the waltz, yet its echoes clung to her like the scent of lilac long after the bloom had died. Her guardian, Lady Rathbone, had forbidden any mention of the Duke. "You were seen," she had hissed, her voice a whip of scorn. "You will thank heaven he did not speak to you again. Men of his kind do not marry for pity. They toy with it." So she kept her silence, attending to her embroidery and reading her small collection of worn novels, as though the world had not changed. Yet it had. Somewhere beneath the ordinary rhythm of days, something trembled, small, forbidden, alive. It arrived in the post that Thursday morning. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy, sealed with crimson wax impressed with a crest she recognized instantly, the Falcon of Wessex. Her hands froze midair. No one wrote her letters, not in years. She broke the seal, careful not to tear the parchment. The handwriting was precise, masculine, and strangely calm. No one should be forgotten at a dance. There was nothing else, no elaborate sentiment, no pretense of affection, just that single line. But as she lifted the paper, something small slid free and caught the morning light. A locket, silver, oval-shaped, engraved with a falcon's wing. She opened it. Empty inside, her heart gave a tremor. The emptiness of it mirrored her own, and yet she could not despise it. She ran her thumb along the smooth edge, feeling warmth where there should have been none. It was madness, surely. The Duke had only meant courtesy. Still, she placed the locket around her neck and hid it beneath her dress. For the first time in years she smiled. By noon the news had spread across Mayfair. Servants whispered, tongues wagged, and by evening the matter had reached Lady Rathbone's ears. "A letter from the Duke?" her guardian demanded, her face pale with outrage. "And a gift? Are you trying to ruin what little remains of your name?" "I did not ask for it," she replied softly. "You should have sent it back. Men like him do not court women like you. Do you wish to make yourself the jest of the ton?" "I do not wish to be anything," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough. "Least of all invisible." Lady Rathbone struck the table with her cane. "Return it at once, or you will find yourself without home or name to defend." That night she could not sleep. The locket seemed to pulse against her skin like a heartbeat not her own. She thought of the Duke's eyes, calm yet filled with something she could not name, perhaps sorrow, perhaps recognition. In a world ruled by appearances he had seen her, and that alone was dangerous enough to undo them both. Days later, in the garden of the Royal Conservatory, she saw him again. The early spring air was cool, scented with damp soil and roses just beginning to bloom. The Duke stood among the glass-house shadows, his coat dark against the pale light. She had not expected him, yet part of her had come hoping. When he turned, there was no surprise in his expression. "You received my letter," he said. "I did." "And the locket?" "I should not have kept it." "But you did." She hesitated. "Yes." He studied her face quietly, as though reading a book only he could decipher. "Does it offend you?" "No," she answered, her voice no louder than the rustle of leaves. "It frightens me." He stepped closer. "I meant no harm, only acknowledgment. You were treated unjustly that night. You speak as though injustice surprises you," she murmured. "It should," he said, and something in his tone made her look up. There was no trace of amusement, no hint of pity, only sincerity, stripped bare of pretense. "They think I dance from charity," he continued, "but the truth is simpler. I danced because you looked as though no one ever had." Her throat tightened. "Then you see too much, my lord. Or perhaps others see too little." They spoke little after that. The rain began to fall softly against the glass panes above, drawing silver veins down the window. She wished to tell him that his kindness only made the world crueler, that every word he offered would cost her 10 in ridicule. But she could not. The warmth of his presence, the quiet steadiness of his manner, felt like sunlight she had been starved of. When they parted, he bowed, not as a duke to a charity case, but as a man to an equal. For the rest of that day she felt weightless, as though the fog that had long surrounded her had lifted. By evening, however, London had decided their fate. "The Duke of Wessex visits her at the conservatory," the whispers hissed. Imagine, the barren girl and the widower. What could such sorrow breed but scandal? Within a week she was no longer invited to teas or musicales. The ton's cruelty was efficient, merciless, and entirely polite. Lady Rathbone refused to speak to her beyond clipped commands. "You will not ruin me by association," she declared. "The Duke will soon tire of this foolish benevolence, and then what will remain?" Nothing, but he did not tire. He wrote again. His letters were brief, almost austere, fragments of thought that revealed more than they concealed. "Do you still walk the garden at dawn? The roses will bloom late this year, but they will bloom. If kindness is mistaken for scandal, then let us both be guilty." Each word became a lifeline, though she dared not reply. And yet he always seemed to know when she had read them. His next letter would arrive just as her doubt began to deepen. Then, one afternoon, as she stepped from a carriage near St. James's Square, she heard her name. Turning, she found the Duchess of Ellingham, the Duke's mother, her expression cool as marble. "You will not destroy him," the Duchess said without preamble. "He has suffered enough without your ambitions fastening upon him like ivy upon stone." "I have no ambitions, your grace," she whispered. "Then prove it. Return what is not yours. A duke may dance with a woman, but he does not stoop to marry beneath his ruin." The words struck deep, but she did not cry. Only later, in the solitude of her chamber, did she allow the tears to fall. She took the locket from her neck, opened it once more, and stared at its hollow center, empty, just as before. Yet this time, the emptiness no longer felt like despair, it felt like space. Space for something new to begin. She closed it gently and held it to her heart. At that same hour, far across the city, the Duke sat at his desk, his pen unmoving, the ink drying at its tip. His mother's warning echoed in his mind, but beneath it was her voice, the softness, the courage, the quiet dignity she carried like armor. He pressed his seal into the wax of a new envelope and whispered into the silence, "Then it shall end with honor." The letter's destination, her name, and, in that moment, though neither could yet know it, the scandal they feared had already become the story of their salvation. The rain had begun before dusk, soft at first, a quiet tapping on the glass panes that soon became a relentless drumming against the conservatory roof. By evening, the garden was drowned in silver light and mist, every rose glistening as though carved from tears. She stood among them, her shawl clutched tight, waiting. It had been a week since she'd resolved to end it, to return the locket, to spare him further ruin. Yet, as the storm deepened, she wondered if courage was not the cruelest virtue of all. The Duke of Wessex arrived without escort, his carriage lanterns cutting through the fog. When he stepped inside the conservatory, he carried the smell of rain and distance, his coat darkened by the storm, his expression unreadable. For a long moment they simply stood, two souls suspended between propriety and truth, between what must be done and what already was. "You should not have come," she said softly. "Then why did you ask me to?" Her breath caught. "Because I needed to end what should never have begun." He removed his gloves with quiet precision, his eyes never leaving hers. "And what has begun exactly?" "Rumor, scandal, pity disguised as affection. If you believe pity is all I offer, then you have mistaken me. Have I?" She whispered, "You know what they say, that I am incapable. A barren woman brings no legacy, no future. For a duke, that is ruin." The words hung heavy in the air, heavier still for having finally been spoken. She turned away, trembling, not from cold but from the unbearable nakedness of truth. For years she had carried that secret like a chain around her heart. To speak it aloud was to surrender every defense she had left. He took a step closer, his boots echoing faintly on the wet stone. "And if I told you I have no need of heirs?" She laughed softly, bitterly. "No man of your standing believes that?" He said nothing, only looked at her, his silence deeper than denial. The rain grew louder, beating against the glass as if the heavens themselves demanded an answer. "I came here," she continued, "to give this back." From within her sleeve she drew the locket. The silver glimmered under the faint light of the lanterns, rainwater dripping from her fingers. "It is beautiful, but it does not belong to me." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "It belongs where it was meant to rest." "It belongs nowhere," she said, her voice trembling. Like me, a pause, a heartbeat suspended in eternity. Then, quietly, he closed her hand around the locket. "You speak as though your worth is measured by what you cannot give," he said. "But you have given more than most who are whole." Her eyes lifted to his. "You do not understand. Women like me live by whispers. We are invited only to be pitied, courted only to be shamed. The world does not forgive a woman who cannot fulfill her purpose. And what of men who have failed theirs?" His tone sharpened, edged with something she had never heard in him before, pain. "Do you imagine I am untouched by expectation? That I do not wake each morning beneath the weight of a name built upon blood and inheritance? I have seen families torn apart by the pursuit of heirs, estates crumbling under the arrogance of men who believed legacy meant life eternal." His voice faltered, the storm echoing his unrest. "My father died chasing an heir after my mother's death. My brother, his only son, died before him. The title came to me, but the joy of it died with them. You call yourself barren, yet my house is emptier still." She stared at him, the locket trembling in her palm. His confession was not rehearsed. It fell raw, unguarded, like thunder breaking open the sky. "You mean to say you do not care for the continuation of your name?" "I mean," he said quietly, that I have seen what names are worth when love is absent. I would rather have peace than lineage. The simplicity of it disarmed her. For a moment all that existed was the sound of rain, the scent of roses bruised under storm. She took a hesitant step forward. "You would defy them all, for me?" He smiled faintly, though sadness lingered in his eyes. "They will gossip regardless. Let them. I have lived too long by the rules of men who found comfort in cruelty." Her throat constricted. "You speak of rebellion as though it were freedom. It is not. It is exile." "Then let me be exiled," he said, his voice low, steady. "For the first time, I have found something worth the cost." Tears blurred her vision. "You do not know what you are saying." "I know precisely," he replied. "You have lived so long in silence that you mistake compassion for deceit. I will not ask your love, only your honesty. Tell me truly, do you feel nothing?" She hesitated, words trapped in the fragile cage of her composure. Then, with a trembling breath, she said, "I feel too much." He stepped forward until their distance dissolved. The lamplight flickered between them, gilding his hair, softening the lines of sorrow etched upon his face. When he took her hand, she did not pull away. "You once said, 'I frighten you,'" he murmured. "Tell me, do I still?" "Yes," she whispered, "but not for the reasons I once did." He lifted her hand to his lips, rainwater tracing along his sleeve. The touch was reverent, almost sacred. "Then let your fear become faith," he said softly. "I do not seek a mother for heirs, nor a wife for appearances. I seek peace, and I find it in you." The words undid her. Years of guarded restraint crumbled, replaced by a trembling warmth that defied sense and status alike. For once she did not think of society, of lineage, of her own brokenness. She thought only of the man before her, the one who saw her not as what she lacked, but as what she was. Lightning flared across the glass ceiling, illuminating them in silver brilliance. The rain thundered louder, drowning the world beyond the walls. "If I accept this," she said, her voice barely a breath, "you will lose everything. Then it will be worth the price." For a moment, time stood still, the kind of moment that belongs to neither past nor future, but to hearts that dare to defy both. He drew her close, his forehead resting against hers, the world narrowing to the rhythm of their breath. "I have nothing to offer you but truth," he whispered. "And I," she said, tears mingling with rain, "have nothing to give but what remains of me. Then we are equals." Outside, a figure lingered at the edge of the glasshouse, a servant, pale-faced, clutching an umbrella, eyes wide with the shock of what he'd seen. When the Duke turned, the shadow vanished into the storm, swallowed by darkness. Neither of them spoke, but both knew what it meant. Tomorrow there would be whispers sharper than ever, voices eager to destroy what they could not understand. Yet for now, in the storm's embrace, they were free. The narrator's voice, hushed and reverent, falls like the last note of a fading waltz. Beneath the rain, two hearts confessed not love alone, but rebellion. And though the world would punish them for it, the truth, once spoken, could never again be silenced. The storm began just as the carriage reached the edge of Bath, its thunder rolling over the hills like the voice of something ancient and cruel. Rain struck the cobblestones with relentless fury, drumming against the carriage roof as though demanding entry. Inside she sat rigid, her hands clasped around the silver locket that had become both her comfort and her curse. The scandal had reached its peak. The servant's whispered tale had grown wings, flying through drawing-rooms and parlors until it became legend. The barren girl and the widowed duke, caught alone in the rain. Society had rendered its verdict. Invitations vanished. Friends turned cold. Lady Rathbone, pale with humiliation, had declared her niece unfit to remain under her roof. "You have made yourself a spectacle," she hissed. "Leave England if you must, but you shall not disgrace my name another day." So she packed her modest trunk, dismissed the maid who wept quietly in the hall, and prepared to leave the only home she had known. The locket remained beneath her dress, a weight against her heart that refused to be lifted. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, tearing at branches and shutters. The carriage lanterns flickered weakly as the driver urged the horses onward. Each mile stretched like a farewell. She told herself she was doing the honorable thing, freeing the Duke from ruin, ending the whispers that had poisoned them both. But honor had never felt so much like grief. When the carriage wheels turned down the muddy lane that led to her small cottage, lightning split the sky. The horses reared, their cries piercing the storm. The driver shouted, fighting the reins, and through the curtain of rain she saw a lone rider galloping toward them. For one heart-stopping moment, she thought it was the storm itself given form, dark coat, wind-tossed hair, eyes lit with fire. It was him. The Duke of Wessex reined his horse hard, dismounting even before it stopped. He was soaked through, his cravat undone, his breath misting in the cold air. The driver, astonished, barely managed to help her down before the Duke was at her side. "Go inside," he said, his voice carrying above the storm. "You should not be here," she answered, her words trembling. "They will say—" "Let them say what they will. I will not have you vanish into the rain like a ghost." She turned toward the door, struggling to steady her breath. "There is nothing left to say, Your Grace." He caught her wrist, not roughly, but with a desperation that burned through propriety. "You mean to leave England? To disappear as though I never existed? It is better for us both," she whispered. "Better?" His laugh was hollow, sharp. "I have lived a life sculpted by duty, wedded to expectation. Do you think I would let that same world dictate to me again? You owe your family a legacy. I owe myself a soul." Lightning flashed again, bathing them in white light. His expression was fierce, unguarded, the mask of a duke stripped away, revealing only the man beneath. "Do you not see?" he said. "You have done what no title, no throne, no prayer could. You made me feel alive again." Her eyes filled with tears that the rain could not disguise. "And what of me? You would tie your life to a woman already condemned by the world? You would destroy your name for mine?" "Yes," he said simply. The word was a strike of thunder. She stepped back, her resolve breaking beneath the weight of his conviction. "You are mad." "Madness has been the only honest thing in my life." He moved closer, the rain pouring between them like a veil. "They will say I've lost reason," he continued, "that I have chosen shame. But I would rather face 1,000 scornful tongues than spend another hour in a world that calls love a weakness." She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "You do not understand what it is to live as I do. To be whispered about, pitied, looked upon with polite disgust." He took her hand, guiding it to his heart. "Then let them whisper about both of us." The words silenced the storm, or perhaps it only seemed so. In the space between thunder, he drew something from his coat pocket, a small box, the silver dulled by rain. He opened it with care, revealing a ring of modest beauty, a single sapphire, deep as midnight, set in gold. Her breath caught. "You cannot mean—" "I mean every word. I came here to ask what I should have asked long ago. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to hold its breath. The rain softened to a hush, falling like grace upon their shoulders. She stared at him, torn between disbelief and yearning. "This cannot end well," she said. "Then let it end beautifully." He reached for her, his touch gentle, reverent. "You once said you have nothing left to give. You were wrong. You have yourself, and that is everything." Tears slipped down her cheeks, lost in the rain. "And you?" she asked, voice breaking. "What will you lose for this?" "Everything I never wanted." She could no longer stand beneath the storm of his gaze. Slowly she extended her hand. His fingers closed around it with quiet certainty, the ring sliding into place as though it had always waited for her. The moment was fragile, luminous, two defiant souls standing in the wreckage of reputation and pride. In the distance, thunder rolled once more, not in warning, but in witness. He drew her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "They will write of this as scandal," he murmured. "Let them. For once the scandal will be true, and then, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it, to believe in the impossible, the forbidden, the wild mercy of love that asked for nothing but itself. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The garden lay strewn with fallen petals and shimmering drops. Inside the small cottage, a single candle burned beside 2 untouched cups of tea. By nightfall, London would know the Duke of Wessex had married the Barren girl, but for now, Beneath the pale morning light, she stood beside him at the window, his hand resting over hers, and whispered, "Let them talk," he smiled faintly, eyes soft. "They always will." The narrator's voice closes like the last flicker of flame. Thus, in the storm's dying breath, he gave her his name, and she gave him his peace. And though the world beyond that door would never forgive them, the sky at least did not judge. The morning sun lay gently across the Wessex estate, the world washed clean after the storm. The gardens glistened, every blade of grass jeweled with dew, and the roses, those stubborn survivors of rain and wind, stood brighter than before. It had been 3 months since their quiet wedding, 3 months since London had erupted with gossip that refused to die. They called her the Duchess without an heir, the Duke's folly, the barren bride. Caricatures appeared in the papers, her face drawn pale and pitiful beside his stern countenance. Invitations from the Queen's court ceased. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Yet in the house upon the hill, life had taken on a curious stillness, neither bitter nor sweet, but something stronger, endurance. The Duke bore the disgrace with an elegance that defied his critics. He no longer attended Parliament or the opera. He spent his mornings in the library, his evenings walking beside her through the garden. He seemed at peace, yet she could not silence the voice that whispered, "He has given up the world for me." She saw it in the servant's eyes, in the letters he burned unread, in the silence that lingered at breakfast. He had chosen her, yes, but love, she feared, was not enough to mend what society had stripped away. One afternoon, as the clock struck 4, a footman entered the drawing-room, his expression uneasy. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. "A letter." "From the palace," her breath caught. She took it, her hands trembling. The seal was unmistakable, Her Majesty's crest pressed into wax. She broke it open. "The Queen requests the presence of the Duke and Duchess of Wessex at a private audience to discuss matters of philanthropy and national concern." She read it twice before daring to speak. "She summons us?" The Duke lifted his gaze from the hearth. His expression was unreadable. "Then the world has not yet decided to forget us." The following week, their carriage rolled through the iron gates of Windsor. The sun broke through the clouds as if to bless their arrival. Still, her hands trembled in her lap. "They will look at me as though I've stolen something that was never mine," she whispered. He turned to her, his voice calm, steady. "Then let them. You cannot steal what was freely given." The Queen received them not in her throne room, but in the private gardens of the palace, a rare honor. The space was quiet, fragrant with lavender and roses, the air thick with the hum of bees. Her Majesty, veiled lightly in lace, regarded them both with a serenity that gave nothing away. "Your Grace," she said, addressing the Duke, "London speaks often of you, some with admiration, many with disbelief." The Duke inclined his head. "That is London's way, ma'am." The Queen's gaze shifted to his wife. "And you, my dear? You have endured much since your marriage. Tell me, does the world's scorn wound you?" She hesitated. "It does, Your Majesty, but only when I allow it to." The Queen's eyes softened. "A wise answer. You see, the measure of nobility lies not in birth, but in the quiet courage to live against expectation." She paused, her voice lowering. "You may not know this, but I lost a child once. The court called me cold, unfeeling. They do not forgive women who fail to serve their purpose. But there are other ways to give life." The Duchess blinked, startled by the confession. "Your Majesty?" "Compassion," said the Queen simply. "It, too, leaves heirs." She turned to the Duke. "You have withdrawn from public life, yet your name still commands respect. Use it. I am establishing a charitable trust for orphan children displaced by the factories. I would have you and your Duchess oversee it." The Duke bowed deeply. "We are honored beyond measure," the Queen smiled faintly. "Do not seek honor, Duke. Seek usefulness." When they departed the palace that day, the air seemed brighter, the world wider. Yet the Duchess could not shake the tremor in her chest. As their carriage rattled along the country road, she looked out the window and whispered, "Do you think she truly meant it, that compassion can leave heirs?" The Duke took her hand. If so, then perhaps we have not been barren at all. Under their stewardship, the Wessex Orphan Trust grew swiftly. The old servants' quarters were transformed into classrooms. The stables became dormitories lined with clean beds. Dozens of children arrived, each carrying the same look she once had, half hope, half disbelief, that kindness could find them. She taught them to read, to plant, to dream. And the Duke, once a man of politics and power, knelt beside them in the dirt, mending wooden toys, speaking gently of patience and dignity. The estate, once silent, bloomed with laughter. Still, not all hearts were easily healed. Late one night, as she walked through the moonlit garden, she found him standing by the fountain, the silver light touching his face. "You've given them everything," she said softly. "Even your peace." He turned, a shadow of a smile crossing his lips. "They give it back tenfold. I thought my name would die with me. Now it will live wherever a child learns to hope." Her throat tightened. "And me?" she asked quietly. "What do I give you?" He stepped closer. "The one thing I had forgotten existed. What is that?" "Home." The word struck her deeper than any vow. Tears welled in her eyes, glimmering like dew under moonlight. He reached for her hand, the same hand he had taken that stormy night, the same hand that had defied the world with his. The sound of laughter drifted from the orphanage windows, children singing a tune she had taught them, voices pure and bright. The garden glowed faintly beneath the lanterns, roses swaying as though bowing in reverence. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you regret it?" she whispered. He smiled. "Only that I did not find you sooner." The night breeze carried the scent of roses and the soft hum of life returning. Around them the estate no longer belonged to the judgmental whispers of London. It belonged to laughter, to resilience, to love unmeasured by lineage or law. As dawn broke, the garden filled with golden light. The children raced across the grass, their laughter mingling with birdsong. The Duchess knelt among them, helping a small girl plant a rose bush near the fountain. When she pressed the soil down with her hands, something inside her, something long withered, bloomed anew. The Duke watched from the terrace, his expression soft, the locket glitting at her throat. It was no longer empty. Inside, a tiny lock of a child's hair, a girl from the orphanage who called her mother. The narrator's voice, tender and final, lingers over the light. They said she could not give life, yet she gave it in ways the world could never count. For in her heart, love found a home, and in his it found forever